When I was a child, my family moved to a big 2-story house with big empty rooms and creaky floorboards. Both my parents worked, so I was often alone when I came home from school. One early evening when I came home, the house was still dark. I called out, "Mom?" and heard her voice say, "Yes?" from upstairs. I called her again as I climbed the stairs to see which room she was in, and again got the same "Yes" reply. We were decorating at the time and I didn't know my way around the maze of rooms, but she was in one of the far ones, right down the hall. I felt uneasy, but I figured that was only natural, so I rushed forward to see my mom, knowing that her presence would calm my fears as a mother's presence always does. Just as I reached for the handle of the door to let myself into the room, I heard the front door downstairs open and my mother call, "Sweetie, are you home?" in a cheery voice. I jumped back, startled, and ran down the stairs to her, but as I glanced back from the top of the stairs, the door to the room slowly opened a crack. For a brief moment, I saw something strange in there, and I don't know what it was, but it was staring at me. There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by many portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable, making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces. He turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. Face down in an unfamiliar bed, he turned, blinking in an unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. I don't know why I looked up, but when I did, I saw him there. He stood against my window. His forehead rested against the glass, and his eyes were still and light, and he smiled a lipstick red, cartoonish grin. And he just stood there in the window. My wife was upstairs sleeping, my son was in his crib, and I couldn't move. I froze and watched him, looking past me through the glass. Oh, please no. His smile never moved, but he put a hand up and slid it down the glass, watching me. With matted hair and yellow skin and face through the window. I couldn't do anything. I just stayed there, frozen, feet still in the bushes I was pruning. Looking into my home, he stood against my window. I begin tucking him into bed, and he tells me, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." I look underneath for his amusement and see him, another him, under the bed, staring back at me, quivering and whispering, "Daddy, there's something on my bed." Last night a friend rushed me out of the house to catch the opening act at a local bar's music night. After a few drinks I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked the table we were sitting at, the bar, the bathrooms, and after no luck I used my friend's phone to call mine. After 2 rings someone answered, gave out a low raspy giggle, and hung up. They didn't answer again. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause and headed home. I found my phone laying on my nightstand, right where I left it. Working in a restaurant at 2:30 a.m., some guy shows up and is just watching us through the front window. Seemed drunk at first, ignored him for a few minutes, turned back around, and he had a huge rock in his hands and lifts it above his head and slams it against the window, shattering the outside layer. He then looks directly at us and says, "I'm gonna kill all of you." We dialed the police immediately and armed ourselves with kitchen knives. He wandered back to his car and sped off. The cops got there maybe 8 minutes later. Seemed like 30 at the time, and couldn't find the guy. We were robbed at gunpoint a few nights later. I just walked out and never went back. A few months ago, a friend of mine, who is an up-and-coming nature photographer, decided to spend a day and night alone in the woods outside of our town. She wanted to get photos of the woods and wildlife as naturally as she could for her portfolio. She wasn't afraid of being alone, as she had camped by herself many times before. She set up a tent in the middle of a small clearing and spent the day taking pictures. She filled up 4 rolls of film on that trip, but when she went and got them developed, she saw 4 pictures that unsettled her. These 4 pictures were taken from inside the tent, of her, asleep in the middle of the night. I used to live in a small building downtown. One of the reasons I moved out was the bad neighborhood, including this guy in the apartment right over mine. It was a weird-looking fella, who mostly kept to himself. Around midnight, though, there was a frequently strange noise that got on my nerves. It wasn't loud, to be fair, but I have really light sleep, so it was hard to get my eyes shut with those little bumping sounds going on and on. It reminded me of high heels walking about, but not as loud, as if the person causing the noise was actually trying to be silent. After a few days, I realized the pattern was always the same, like a recording played over and over with random intervals in between, and that went on for the best part of a year, always the same sequence of bumps, slowly tattooed into my mind, sometimes for hours straight during the night. It was only several years later, helping my daughter with her homework, that I learned a little bit of Morse code. She knocked on the table with her knuckles, and a shiver immediately went through my spine as I recognized the exact pattern. When I asked her what it meant, she laughed. "It's the easiest one, Daddy," she said. "It's the one to call for help." When I had just graduated high school, I started working at a truck stop a few miles outside of town. I usually worked evenings, but I had to switch shifts with the night shift guy, so there I was, at 3 a.m., fighting sleep. A car pulls into the parking lot and parks. There's a guy in the driver's seat, crying, and a woman in the passenger seat just staring straight ahead, not moving, no emotion whatsoever. They sat there for what seemed like an hour. Then the guy gets out and he comes in. He grabs a few random items and puts them on the counter. The whole time he is looking all around, checking for other people. There was no one but us, for miles. He then stares right into my very soul and says, "It's quiet out here, isn't it? So quiet you can almost hear the angels singing." I muttered something unmemorable and he left. She never moved.